I will expect that there'll be some other people who will join us a little later, but we have a very another interesting topic. I hope it'll be interesting to you, but it's one that I think we struggle with, and when we think about the human connection, one of the things that we have that kind of makes human connections, say, more difficult are grudges, and I thought we would, kind of explore that a bit, because I think it's not only important to recognize it, but also to explore ways of how we can get past those grudges, especially when those grudges impact relationships that are critical to us, So first, I think we should start off by defining terms, because grudge is one of those words that it can have a lot of different meanings to different people. So I would like to start off by exploring, what do you all think a grudge is? How would you define a grudge? Anyone can start. Hey, go ahead.
Hi all.
Hey.
I would say that holding bad thoughts and bad feelings in your heart.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Holding bad thoughts and bad feelings in your heart. Okay. And not to be too picky, but when you say in your heart, what do you mean by that?
Versus in your head. It's your your emotions, how you're not able to deal with something that has happened with someone or something or some situation, and you're not able to get rid of it, get rid of the feeling, get rid of the either the sad feeling or the ugly feel, the bad feeling, the anger, not being able to work through it in a good way, that it harms you, it makes you feel worse about yourself and about your situation.
Excellent. That's exactly what I was looking for, because I think it does have to do with an emotional response as opposed to a cognitive response. If you were trying to say something, Jace, your mic's off.
Not really, but
okay.
I agree. That's what I meant.
Okay, good. Okay, so anyone else, what would be your definition of a grudge?
I would go so far as to say passive aggressive behaviors towards another due to a what I have interpreted as some sort of wrongdoing.
Okay. So it has to do with a behavior from you, right? Okay.
Could be just passive aggressive thinking, or around that other individual passive aggressive behavior.
Could it be active aggressive?
Sure. Yep. For some.
I mean, because to me, I can think of the most damaging ones is when it is active.
Yeah, for whatever reason, in my mind, a grudge is always, it's not as straightforward as like, just an all out hatred, like open
Okay.
hatred. A grudge is a little bit more, there's some sort of secrecy or, something that hasn't been fully disclosed to all parties when I think of a grudge.
Okay, so it's muted, or we could say attenuated as the new word in biology for most of it. So a person may hold some kind of negative feeling or thought, but it's not sort of in their face. For you, it takes on the aura or the framing of, I'm not really going to be open about it or confront that person about it necessarily, but it's something, when I see them, I don't like them as much.
Yes.
There's a muting of my love or hatred for them.
Yes.
colored by whatever thing it was. Anyone else?
I was going to just jump in to say something that Sherilyn has put in the chat is almost exactly in line with what I think of when I think of a grudge. She says a negative thought or feelings about another person or thing that keeps you from engaging with them. And when I think of having a grudge toward a person, it's something that will sort of poison all my interactions with that person if I can't get over it. So even whether I am behaving overtly in a negative way or not, what I'm feeling and thinking are negative toward that person. So it makes it very difficult for me to enjoy spending time with them, to, think about what their perspective might be, even sometimes have a conversation with them, unless I'm able to get over that grudge. So I think it's more of the effects of how you end up feeling that you can't get rid of or let go, as we're talking about today, can't let go of those feelings when you're around that person, whether they're relevant at that moment or not.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Excellent contribution to this conversation. Anyone else have some insight as to how they see or how you experience a grudge, whether you have the grudge or someone has it against you?
Sometimes I think, can you hear me?
Yes.
I think grudges are used as motivational. I think of sports, especially, they talk about grudge matches. And so teams, I think, sometimes are fired up by the need to avenge earlier defeats. It's sort of sports psychology. That's pretty interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
That you can turn that negative experience into positive energy by winning the next time.
Yeah.
And the other thing that occurs to me is it's quite an awful sounding word, isn't it? Grudge. It's one of the least pleasant sounding words in the language. So it works pretty well for what it intends, I think. Starting with the sound of it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Interesting. Anyone else? Yeah. Would care to engage in what they think a grudge is or how they experience it?
I guess I could throw in a couple thoughts on it now. Grudge to me seems somebody that's kind of a distance from me, maybe because I've put them there in my mind, isolated them from people I think about or interact with for something that I've heard or seen. I had a hard time even remembering carrying grudges, but I did manage to think of a couple in the past. It also seems to me for me at least, it's affiliated with a need to forgive, but haven't quite gotten to the point where I'm ready to let go, as Jennifer said.
Okay, let's look at why grudges exist in the first place. You know, what happens, do you think, that creates a grudge? You know, like what kind of things happen that will make you hold or has in the past or now have you holding a grudge against someone? And what kind of things do you think have made people hold a grudge against you? What causes grudges?
I would say for me, the times I can think of when I might hold a grudge against a person, they've either mistreated me or mistreated one of my family members or good friends. I mean, heaven forbid, don't mistreat my child. I might never forgive you, although I'll try. So I assume that that's the same thing that might cause someone to hold a grudge against me, is if I mistreat them or someone they love.
Mhm. Mhm. Thank you. Anyone else?
Or at least the perception of mistreatment. That's an irony, isn't it?
Yes.
Sometimes the grudge is ill-advised. It's based on misunderstanding rather than actual mistreatment.
Yes. So many times. Sherilyn, you opened your mic. Did you?
I think I agree with that wholeheartedly. I think it's a misunderstanding, a miscommunication, intentions that aren't understood. And it's very complicated because then a miscommunication leads to no communication, which is the only thing that will resolve the grudge. So it's a very grungy word that is hugely complicated. It's hard. And I think the things that I've seen when people have had a grudge, it's almost as though it gets deeper and thicker and more muddled and complicated as time goes on if it's not addressed. I had many years ago, and they've passed away now, but I had uncles that did not speak, for 40 years. And it's really heartbreaking. But it happens.
So, okay, can we explore that a little bit since you know of a particular situation, Sherilyn? I'd like to use that to explore a little bit about what kind of things happen and then why that response, like another response would be duke it out or yell at each other. And now you're done with that, and then that yelling or duking it out, you come to some, you work it out, or you just say, okay, that part of that person I don't like, but I'll take the rest of it. I'm still going to speak to them, you know what I mean? But, and you might hold that thing as a grudge. I like you, but I'm never going to trust you to bake cookies again because I know you'll burn them, so, or something like that, So what kind of things, bring people have a-
I know that in that particular instance, it was over the death of a family member, and someone did not get what they thought was theirs.
Oh, money, the root of all.
Money, land,
Right.
whatever it is. And
Possession.
again, and it's so interesting to me because, could that have been discussed previously so that there wasn't that result before death?
Mhm. Mhm. Those kind of things are I think can be more complicated than they appear on the surface, because unfortunately, money represents survival, because we've translated to we can't survive without money. And so when someone takes something, some material thing that you feel is belongs to you on your side of the table, which will help you to survive and maybe even thrive, that can feel very threatening. So it can emotionally feel almost as this if they pointed a gun in your face, because what's the difference if somebody shoots you or starves you to death? I mean, you're still dead, and caused by a specific action. So sometimes the brain doesn't make a separation between those kind of things. Threat is threat. It's threat and non-threat. The things that threaten you, you don't like, and the things that don't threaten you, even if you don't particularly like them, you're okay with them. They can exist in the same universe as you do, and maybe you don't even notice them. But the thing that threatens you, you remember that.
And how many times does a grudge really involve more than two parties?
Oh,
In that particular case, really, right? It's a third party that no longer is here that actually is a part of the grudge.
yeah. And sometimes it's a grudge against somebody you don't even know, like the famous Hatfields and McCoys. It's like 5 or 6 generations. You forgot why you don't like them, but they're McCoys.
Don't like them.
Okay, we don't like them just because. And so that's a kind of a grudge thing too. Well, what are some other things that people tend to hold grudges about, or tend to engender or create grudges? Well, hearing none. Unless somebody has one.
Well, I was just going to say that most of the grudges that I can remember, that I kind of feel sad about it, are the ones that have to do. All of them actually had to do with family members, people that knew one another intimately and that were close at one time, and obviously probably had an emotional attachment to one another, and then something happened in which they um, they couldn't communicate anymore, and they didn't love one another anymore, and they not only did they not communicate with one another, but they also told other family members not to communicate with that person. And so it kind of spinballed, and you kind of were put in a situation, well, who do I believe, and which side am I going to take? And so then you as an individual have to decide whether you want to be part of that grudge or not part of that grudge. And so it's not so much happened to me in that instance, but I've seen how damaging it can be to families, in this instance to a tioshpai or extended family, because it affects not just those two people, but it affects so many other people that really it shouldn't, because if they would deal with what's causing them, whatever happened in the past, to deal with it, then it could be really a powerful connection again, and they could live on their lives in a good way instead of a negative way and in a sad way. So much is lost when you can't deal with things.
I'd like to sort of spin off of that into more get under the hood of like the kind of things that create a grudge, and then why it's so hard to deal with it. You know, why is it hard to deal with it before it becomes a grudge? What kind of things, you know, an incident happens, somebody does something like don't get the inheritance, or, you know, or like in prison, they looked at me wrong, you know, or something like that. So what is it, do you think, that makes it hard for us to deal with that thing at the moment of occurrence? To just say, okay, well, let's sit down and talk about that. Okay, Betty?
I know in my family's case, and I think many of us of my generation, we were raised in sort of a reticent way of dealing with things. We were open with each other when things were good and happy. And then when our parents become old and we realize they need our help, I think our family constellation became very vulnerable. And it was almost impossible to communicate in a way that would work that out. So I think that it's that difficulty of really communicating your feelings to each other and exploring and giving each other an opportunity that was really lacking.
Mm-hmm. So what would you say, Betty, that or have you ever identified what it is that made it hard to have the conversation? You know, I mean, we can say that it, and I'm not disputing that at all, that, you know, it's sort of like how our upbringing was, that, you know, it's maybe some things are harder to talk about. But what makes it, can you identify what makes it hard? What is it, what element was thrown in to make it difficult to have a conversation about pain that you feel?
There was not good communication historically. And most of this I see in my mother's line, because I mean, it goes back to this transgenerational trauma, which isn't just in the Dakota tradition, but probably all of us, because all of our families who have lived for generations have had times when they were endangered, they were chased, they were silenced and repressed. And my mother's family never got through that into a new open way. So we didn't have good communication with our mother. She didn't have a mother, she had a stepmother and a father, but I mean, it just didn't happen for her. After she died, I had an opportunity to have lunch with her her closest 3 women friends that I identified and knew. And my purpose was to ask her, did my mother ever confide in any of you? And they all looked at each other and just kind of sadly shook their heads. So if she didn't have a woman friend she could confide in, that set a really bad path for her. And so we didn't know what was missing, although I think we all felt the absence of it. We talk about it now. That's the grace now. My siblings and I and our offspring, we are able now, and we plan for times to be together. It's kind of hard to get us together, but we have to heal this or it's going to perpetuate. So that's always made it hard for me to express my most vulnerable feelings. That's where the greatest wound is. That's where the greatest difficulty lies. That's my opinion and my observation.
So would you say, when you say it was difficult to communicate, would you say it's because you can't find the words, or would you say because feelings well up and the words don't come, or you're not quite sure, like maybe it's something you should do, or, it's just like all thumbs, or what is it that makes it, or can you identify what is it that makes it difficult? What was lacking?
I think in childhood, it was the ignorance that there were other ways. We just lived where we lived, how we lived day to day. And it was, we're all high verbal. It was never a thing of not having good language skills. But there was just, I don't know, maybe it's, one thing, you don't talk back. My mother could get pretty outrageous when dad wasn't around and his job took him away from home. We just kind of lived trying to stay under her radar, I guess. And longing, I know now, longing for physical attention, positive attention. And I don't mean in any way to paint my mother in a bad light. She grew a lot in her elderhood when she was no longer responsible for everything around her. And she was loved by many, and rightly so, and all of us. But it just wasn't a possibility. We didn't see it. And then it carried over into my personal relationships, perhaps because I didn't have an interim growing up period, as many people do when they leave home and go to college or do their own thing. I went from my father's home to my husband's home. I mean, we, married too young. And from then on, I just kind of lived like my mother, I think, in a lot of ways, till that became unbearable for me.
So that brings up an interesting, I wouldn't call it necessarily a dilemma, but it kind of feels like one. And that is, how do we learn things to do that somebody didn't teach us? How do we find new ways? So in this case, how do we find, or what kind of ways have others found of dealing with grudges? If you have them, that's one discussion. Or if you've realized that someone has one against you, that's another angle to come at this question.
I would say it's almost become a bit of a cliche, but the one way that I'm best able to forgive often is or to get over or to let go, is to remember that holding a grudge probably hurts me more than the other person. It's like I don't know if it's Buddha that said it or if that's an urban legend, but that idea that holding on to anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. I realize that, I've also heard people talk about forgiveness is not saying what the other person did or what you think they did is okay. It's simply saying, I'm not going to let it run my life anymore. And so a lot of it is about, I'm not hurting them. I'm not getting back at them. I'm not accomplishing anything. I'm just hurting myself. So I need to then work through that and say, I am going to put this aside for my own mental health.
I found, I'll throw this in the mix because, and I hope it doesn't complicate your ability to answer for anyone, but sometimes I feel like grudges are a kind of response, or they're threat responses. you know? So in other words, something hurt me. I don't want to be hurt anymore. Something threatens me and I don't want to feel threatened anymore. And without, you know, meticulous processing, the brain sets up a schema or, you know, a framework where I put that person or that thing or those people over there, so they're not a thing anymore. And the grudge helps me remember why they're over there and I'm over here. You know, it's like by, you know, if I notice my own pattern, I try at least not to have any enemies because they're too heavy to carry around. And also you have to keep remembering who they are. And I don't have that good a memory, so I forget who my enemies are. So, but that said, you know, there are cases when I just say, okay, that person, I don't really need to talk to them anymore. You know, it's like, you know, I don't have necessarily a bad feeling about them, or at least that part goes away. But I remember, just like I remember, like, you know, if you walk next to a cliff, it might crumble and you fall off. I just sort of like stay away from that, you know, or just like I remember, like when the coil on the stove is red, that's a sign that you don't touch it. You know, it's one of those kind of things, like nothing, you know, in a way it's a grudge because I'm thinking nothing's good is going to happen with an interaction with this person, you know, but cognitively, I know that the person that I knew yesterday is just not possible to be the same person today. Now, the thing I didn't like about them might still be there, but that's not the same person because each of us are in a constant state of change. And so I know just from experimental data that people are just not going to be the same person. I just don't know how they change. So that thinking to me is not very valid, you know, but I can't say that I don't struggle with that, you know, with trying to like put that aside, because I do struggle with that. And sometimes I'm successful, sometimes I'm not. Comments? How you deal with
Well, I think that what you just said about differences is useful. I do think that at least in the short term, there are irreconcilable differences. That there are some things that probably aren't going to be resolved, and that you can spend a disproportionate amount of energy trying to resolve them. And so I think acceptance of irreconcilable differences is a pretty important human behavior. It's not to say that you can't eventually revisit those differences and try to decide whether or not they're resolvable. But I think in the short term, it's better to understand that there are some irreconcilable differences that you're not going to be able to get very far in resolving. And you ought not to waste precious time and energy trying to resolve them. It's different than holding a grudge. It's just a matter of understanding realistically that not everything is negotiable.
Yeah. Well, I will underscore that I struggle with that. And the reason I struggle with it is because I'm not satisfied with that, with that part of my personality at this point. You know, in other words, I think there may be a way that I haven't found, you know, and I think, you know, in some ways, words and using words have been pretty much my, what I've done for a living. That have been, let's say, my positive cash flow, But and the thing that has carried me a lot, but I now realize how weak words are, and how much they don't do what I have expected them to do, how much what I'm saying may make perfect sense to me, but it's a lot, the words have attachments to my experiences that many people don't have. And I would say nobody has my exact experiences, so I don't know that I can find words that the meaning I attach is the same meaning that other people attach. And so I'm always looking now for other ways to deal with things like grudges. And so I say that to throw it out to you. What other kinds of ways can we possibly deal with a grudge that either we have against others or they have against us, that at least to a lesser extent have to do with words? Are there things that we can do ourselves, or conditions that we can create where the grudge itself goes away, even though why, and the understanding about what happened and all of that may not ever come to pass, but you get rid of that feeling of distance or dislike? Can you offer some things or approaches that we might take?
I have an idea,
Mm.
and I've tried this in the last several years, and I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but I found that it works to a certain degree. And you are correct. It is not your words only by any way, shape, or form. It is your body language. It is your example, your model, and your approach. And one of the things I was thinking, you show friendliness and acceptance with smiles and continue to do it even though you are probably lambasted or however you want to put it, but just go ahead with your ways of doing it. And I call it the love bomb. They are for individuals. If I truly believe I accept all people, however they are, then I must know, I must understand them and where he or she are coming from. And I'm thinking, boy, that's kind of a big statement, but I've tried it for almost a year with someone, and I called it a lot of the P word, patience.
Mm.
And it came around slowly.
Mm.
But we truly do not change people's ideas, because unless he or she are ready to be accepting and change, we don't change others purposely, but maybe by how we live our lives.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it's right or wrong, but it worked for me a couple of times, and I thought it's worth it.
I'm reminded of something which is particularly interesting in tribal tradition. Jace could probably speak more fully to this, but this idea Um, or actually this behavior among traditional cultures, I've heard this as part of traditional Lakota culture, of adopting, embracing and even adopting the wrongdoer, so that a murderer might be adopted by the family of the person he had murdered. And the idea being, I think, that almost unimaginable degree of acceptance of the other changed both the wronged and the wrongdoer. It's hard to imagine being able to do that, but apparently it was a fairly effective strategy for the resolution of differences. Jace, you have anything more to say about that?
I guess, you know, that's it. It's often unimaginable for somebody to think of how could you bring someone into your tioshpai or your family that has wronged you or that has really caused you to lose a child or lose a loved one. But that's what our people did in the past. They embraced that idea of what they call it, different words, or having compassion or having an understanding of where that person, why that person did the thing that they did, and understanding also that if you lose, for example, a son or a daughter, and because that person has taken their life, then they replace in a way that person, but mainly it allows the I don't know, allows, I don't know what word to use, but allows the people then to move on and to embrace that relative, and hopefully that person will be a part of their group, so there's continued harmony, so the imbalance that they have caused, so they can right it or make it more harmonious again, because they have through their actions they have caused a great disharmony within that group. And the goal is to always try to get along with one another, and to take care of one another, and all the other values that go along with that, being cooperative and thinking the group first versus individual, and choosing to forgive. And sometimes we have to be more assertive, I guess, in our way of choosing to embrace whatever happened and deal with it head on in that way. Nowadays, I think that would be real difficult for a lot of people to do. I've heard more people say, I don't know how they could do that. How could they do that? Bring someone into your family that has caused you so much harm. But I think a lot of it has to do with the worldview that there was a reason why it happened, and now we have to try to make it homeostasis, I guess. We have to make it a balance again in that life. And it's, I don't know, that's either that or they would ban the person, make them leave if they were really, really bad and they were causing too much disruption. Just, make them leave our group because they're doing too many bad things to a lot of bad, to a lot of us. So, make them leave and go someplace else. But I think it's what I believe is how I deal with things is through prayer. And I think a lot of people, a lot of cultures deal with situations like this through prayer and finding some way to change the person that I am versus try to change the other person. And I like what Lee said about being a model, being an example, because what you do is more powerful than what you say. And so if you can show love and show that, well, let's accept this person into our Tioshpai, maybe we can, maybe he will be a part of this and he will be a productive part of our Tioshpai versus causing harm to the group. Again, the group collective. We always strive to be more group oriented versus individual. I think I said too much, but that's kind of how I look at it anyway.
Well, I don't think it was too much at all. It was enlightening. Thank you, Jace. Anyone else on how you might approach dissolving a grudge, making that emotional feeling that we talked about at the top of this program, that sense of, you know, negative feeling emotionally that you have, even though the incident, whatever it is, that's past, it's not, you know, and it's past and sealed in the past, but you are still holding on to, let's say, some emotional residue from whatever caused you to have it. So what do you do to dissolve that feeling that we are loosely calling a grudge, that negative feeling?
I think the more that you can sort of try to live in the present moment, the more you can, you know, it's not a direct action towards what you're feeling, but it can help you to, you know, the less you think about the past or the future and you think about, what am I doing now? What's this moment I'm in? So you're not constantly just, oh, that person did something to me, I can't believe it. Like what can you do right now in your life that's going to be positive? And what is the benefit of thinking about how somebody wronged you? It's pretty ridiculous if you really analyze it, because you're like, well, is thinking about this gonna change anything? No. All you can do is just live your own life and do what you can. And the more you're thinking about these types of negative things, that's just gonna, like Jennifer said, that's gonna affect you in a negative way. You know, you're not gonna send like your negative brainwaves to that person somehow and being like, I'm thinking about how you did this to me, so I'm gonna get you. Well, no, that's not how it works.
Yeah. But okay, so just to follow up on that, Ryan, we were talking earlier about how a grudge is pretty much an emotional thing, you know, and I'm not quite sure how a rational thought, at least that's where I'm blocked in my own kind of a past approaches to it. I'm not so sure how my rational thought really affects my emotional being, as far as like putting ideas and moving ideas around. They might point me in a direction, but as far as like an actual tool, you know, it's kind of a comparison between the pencil of the draftsman and the tools of the carpenter. You know, I can draft in my mind all kinds of things to do, but it's not a thing on paper, or it's just an idea. or in my head is just a thing. Nothing happened until some rubber meets the road. And so what I'm looking for now are ways that we can put some rubber on the road, where something actually moves. What are the things that change that grudge or emotional feeling? Betty,
Well,
you look like you're, oh, I'm
I would,
sorry, go ahead.
I would say just like be related to what I'm saying.
Mm.
That's not going to help your direct situation, but practicing those things, will help you overall.
Which things?
Just not dwelling on
Mm,
the past and future,
mm.
which will should affect your life in a positive manner overall if you can try to do that, and it's not something you can just wake up one day and do it. Say, I'm not going to think about the past anymore. Like you and I have talked about this too, where you see those little kitsch signs that say like let go and live, and it's like, okay, thanks for the advice, but how do I do that? You know, people, it's almost just like practicing something and getting good at it. You can't just see an inspirational sign and say, "Oh, that's what I'm going to do."
Mhm.
You have to think about it and you have to practice it in your life, or you're not. It's just like practicing anything.
Yes. Betty, you were going to say something.
Some years ago, the woman named Sarah Van Branach wrote a book called Simple Abundance, and a lot of other things came from that. And one of them was to learn forgiveness. And she had an exercise that seemed ludicrous to me, but I was in so much turmoil emotionally with it that I tried it. And it was to sit with a dedicated little notebook every day, once a day, and write down 5 things for which I was grateful, even if you had to write the same 5 things every day. And I did that. And somehow it changed me so that I saw what was my hurting myself by being torn up over this situation. And that the ultimate way out of that was to understand what forgiveness is and how to do it. And so I very deliberately within myself forgave a person that I was so upset about. I didn't even let that person know. I never was really accusatory. I never wrote a letter and said, okay, I've forgiven you. It's okay now. I just changed inside myself and let that anger go. And then that freed me to put myself in a situation where I could have some kind of interactions again. And it was a gradual process. And it really did heal a lot of things along the way and continues to work for me and for them, I think, too.
Mhm.
I have no scientific explanation, Lawrence. I'll leave it.
I don't know that there necessarily is a scientific explanation for emotions. I mean, there might be, because it might be a chemical-based thing. I don't know, but I don't know what it is. Thank you. We're coming up on the end of our time here today, but I'm hoping that you have at least started to think a little more about grudges, and maybe you found some kind of useful tips. I would like to explore more myself. I know I'm always looking for different ways to handle things that the little things like, oh, I don't know why don't I like that person, or why do I have that feeling, even if, that's not a positive feeling about that person or that business, and then occasionally I will try again. Now, some of them are too expensive. Like, I had a let's say a bad relationship or incident with a company that was a printing company And so I could go back years later and say, okay, is this still the same company? People change or something like that. And I just said, at that time, when this thing happened, I was thinking, oh, I'm never going to that company again. I'm done with them. Their attitude is wrong. That was my thing. But I have to say, it was an emotional response because I felt like the people just like really just treated me wrong, and they had no respect, and even for their business. So it was like a thing. But years later, I said, okay, well, I'll try this company again. Well, it was a different thing, but there was still like sort of like, it's like, what's in it for me? You know, it's like not necessarily taking care of the customer's needs, you know. So I just thought, okay, well, I guess, you know, I don't really need, I have other things to do. It's not that I think bad about them, I just don't think about them. Now there was an automobile company that I just sort of, I was ready to, in fact, I did hire an attorney to go after. Then I just thought, well, I get into this, and then I'm starting to feel like I will become them, because I could feel myself becoming vicious, you know. In other words, I was going after the throat, you know, and I had figured out ways to grab the throat of this business. But then I thought, yeah, but if I do that, then it starts to taint me, you know. I start to lust for blood, you know, so to speak, you know. And so I just called the attorney and said, okay, forget about it. You know, never mind. You know, I paid him for his time and just said, I'm dropping it because, and I told him, I said, because if I keep this up, I'm going to become him. And that's a worse fate than whatever else happened to me. So I'm done, you know. So I think therein lies, let's say the moral of the story, you know, is like, if we hold on to those grudges, and especially if we act on them and we're working on making that sucker pay, you know, it has a way of tarnishing us. You know, even though we might make a case for, well, I'm looking out for my best interest, or as I put it, making sure this doesn't happen to anyone else. But I had to finally look at myself and say, okay, what are you feeling? And how are you like accentuating that feeling? And I could see the path to where I would eventually become what I was resisting. I would become that person or that business. And I couldn't allow myself to be that, you know. So we've come to the end of our road, as they, what was that group that say, we've come to the end of our road? Anyway, it was a pleasure. And I hope you got something out of this, and will join us again next week, same time, same station. And we'll see you.
Later.